The autumn air carried that specific brittle chill that usually makes an evening walk a brisk head-down affair. The streetlights flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the cracked asphalt of the suburban pavement. I was walking my golden retriever mix, Barnaby, letting him dictate the pace through the maze of familiar fire hydrants and overgrown hedges. We were 2 blocks from home when Barnaby stopped dead, the leash pulling taut against my knuckles. He let out a low, uncertain whine, his nose pointed toward a dark mass resting precariously in the dead center of the road. At first glance, under the amber glow of the sodium lamps, it looked like a discarded pile of filthy rags, or perhaps a crumpled moving blanket that had tumbled from a passing truck. But then the mass shivered, a violent, full-body tremor that rattled the dry leaves scattered around it. I shortened my grip on the leash and approached, my boots scuffing the pavement. The closer I got, the more the shape resolved into a nightmare. It was a dog, or at least the tragic, crumbling architecture of what used to be one. The poor creature was a horrifying monument to human apathy. Her fur was a solid, impenetrable helmet of filth, matted so tightly to her skeletal frame that it pulled her skin taut, tearing at the roots. Vast patches of her coat had rotted away entirely, revealing raw, weeping skin ravaged by mange and crawling with legions of fleas. When she tried to shift her weight, the sound was sickening, a dry, rhythmic clicking against the asphalt. Her nails had grown so long and curled they looped entirely back around, forcing her to stand painfully on the delicate backs of her paw pads. The left side of her face was a swollen, inflamed mass, the eye completely sealed shut beneath a thick, hardened crust of yellow mucus. She didn't look up at me. She just stood there, swaying in the cold wind, entirely empty. I reached into my pocket, my fingers trembling slightly as I pulled out my phone and dialed my wife, Corrine. I didn't bother with a greeting when she answered. I just told her to grab the heavy fleece blanket from the trunk of the car and get to my location immediately. While I waited, a porch light snapped on across the street. The heavy wooden door of a neglected, peeling split-level house groaned open, and the aluminum screen door followed with a rusted shriek. Out stepped a man who looked exactly like the sort of rot that would allow an animal to decay while still breathing. He wore a stained, yellowing undershirt and baggy slacks held up by a frayed leather belt. His hair was a greasy, silver shock, and his eyes were flat, glassy, and completely devoid of urgency. He leaned heavily against the wooden railing of his porch, cleared his throat with a wet, rattling cough and whistled. A pathetic, breathy sound. He slapped his thigh and called out to the shivering mass in the street, telling it to get back inside. A white-hot spike of pure, unadulterated rage drove itself straight through my chest. The kind of anger that temporarily deafens you, replacing all ambient sound with the rush of your own blood. I closed the distance to his driveway in 4 massive strides, Barnaby trotting nervously at my heel. I demanded to know if the creature in the street belonged to him. The man blinked, a slow, reptilian movement, and muttered that it was his. I gestured wildly at the dog, my voice cracking as I demanded an explanation for why she looked like a decaying corpse. The man simply shrugged, a gesture of profound indifference, and said she was just sick, that she refused to eat. The absolute casualness of his response snapped whatever thin tether of civility I had left. I stepped onto the first rung of his porch stairs and unleashed a torrent of venom. I informed him, with spit flying from my lips and my voice echoing off the neighboring houses, that there was not a single scenario on this earth where he was ever touching that animal again. He bristled, puffing out his chest, stepping forward to reclaim his property. I didn't budge. I dared him to take another step. The volume of our escalating hostility acted as an alarm clock for the block. Curtains twitched. Porch lights flicked on. Several neighbors stepped out onto their lawns, arms crossed against the cold, watching the spectacle. One of them, a woman in a thick bathrobe, called out that he had another dog trapped inside that garbage heap of a house. Just as the man took a hesitant step down the stairs, headlights washed over us. Corrine threw her station wagon into park, leaving the engine idling as she sprinted out with the heavy gray blanket. Without taking my eyes off the man on the porch, I backed away, scooped the fragile, trembling animal into the fleece, and settled her carefully into the back seat. We slammed the doors and drove away, leaving him standing on his rotting porch, perfectly illuminated by the glaring judgment of his neighbors. The smell inside the car was overpowering, a heavy, metallic stench of infection, yeast, and rancid oils. We pulled into our driveway, bypassing the front door and heading straight for the warmth of the garage. We set up a makeshift triage station under the harsh fluorescent shop lights. Corrine brought out a basin of warm water and a bottle of mild dish soap, the only thing we figured would cut through the grease and kill the fleas without burning her raw skin. We decided to call her Clementine. It felt like she deserved a name that sounded sweet and dignified, a stark counterpoint to the ugliness she had endured. Bathing Clementine was a delicate, heartbreaking procedure. As the warm water soaked into her matted armor, the true extent of her emaciation became horrifyingly clear. She was nothing but sharp angles and protruding ribs beneath the wet fur. The water running off her body and spiraling down the garage drain was the color of dark tea, thick with dirt, dried blood, and dead parasites. She didn't struggle. She just leaned heavily against Kareen's hands, letting out soft, broken sighs. Once she was clean, or at least as clean as we could manage without a surgical grooming, I opened a can of premium beef and liver wet food. The sound of the aluminum pop-top seemed to trigger a primal, buried instinct. She dragged herself toward the ceramic bowl and inhaled the contents with a desperate, frantic energy, licking the porcelain clean until it squeaked. We built her a fortress of soft pillows and heated blankets in the corner of the garage, leaving a space heater running on low to keep the chill at bay. For the first time in what must have been years, Clementine slept without shaking. The following morning, we loaded her back into the car and drove straight to the county's only no-kill shelter. The intake staff took one look at Clementine and immediately bypassed the waiting room, rushing her to the back veterinary clinic. I stood at the front desk, my hands resting on the cold laminate counter, and gave a meticulously detailed statement to the animal control officer who had been dispatched. I gave him the exact address of the peeling split-level house, the description of the man, and the neighbor's testimony about a second dog trapped inside. The officer's expression hardened into a grim, professional mask. He assured me they were heading over there immediately with a warrant. They made good on that promise. By noon, a team had raided the property, dragging the man out onto his lawn while they confiscated a second, severely neglected terrier from the squalor of his living room. But the victory was entirely hollow. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was the lead veterinarian from the shelter. Her voice carried the heavy, practiced cadence of someone about to deliver terrible news. Clementine's blood work had come back. Her kidneys were in complete failure, her liver was shutting down, and the infection from the untreated mange had gone systemic, poisoning her blood. The malnutrition had eaten away at her heart muscle. She was incredibly old, and her body simply had nothing left to fight with. The vet explained that keeping her alive would only prolong her agony. Kareen and I sat on the edge of our bed in silence, the phone resting between us on the mattress. We gave the authorization. Clementine was put to sleep, slipping away in a warm, clean room surrounded by people who had tried to save her. Grief is a strange mechanism. It usually starts as a heavy, suffocating blanket, but if left to marinate, it crystallizes into something sharp and cold. I couldn't stop thinking about the man on the porch. The sheer, casual arrogance of his neglect. The law had taken his other dog, and perhaps he would face a fine, maybe a misdemeanor charge for animal cruelty that would eventually be pleaded down to a slap on the wrist by an overworked public defender. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close to a fraction of the misery he had dispensed. Here is where the architecture of my vengeance began to take shape. It wasn't born of grand, cinematic violence. It was born of relentless, petty biological warfare. The man's house, the decaying split level, happened to sit directly on the route I took Barnaby walking twice a day, morning and evening like clockwork. Barnaby was a creature of immaculate routine. His digestion was a marvel of predictable timing. Every single day, without fail, Barnaby would find a patch of grass about 2 houses down from the abuser's property to relieve himself. Previously, I would dutifully bag the waste in thick, green biodegradable plastic, tie a tight knot, and carry it for the remaining mile of our walk until we reached my home garbage can. The morning after Clementine died, Barnaby did his business. I bagged it, tied the knot, and felt the heavy, warm weight of it in my palm. I looked down the street at the peeling paint and the sagging gutters of the abuser's house. The idea blossomed in my mind with terrible, glorious clarity. I didn't need to carry this back to my house. I had a perfectly acceptable disposal site right in front of me. I waited until I was directly parallel to his front walkway. I checked the street empty. I checked the windows dark. I gripped the knotted plastic, wound my arm back like a baseball pitcher in the bottom of the ninth, and launched the bag high into the crisp morning air. It sailed in a beautiful, soaring arc, clearing the overgrown oak tree in his front yard, before landing with a magnificent, resounding thwack directly on the highest peak of his shingled roof. It stuck there, a green monument to retribution. That evening I did it again. Another perfect arc, another satisfying impact. By the end of the first week, there were 14 bags of excrement baking on his roof. At first, the man tried to fight back against the sudden, mysterious plague descending upon his home. On a Saturday afternoon, I walked by and saw him dragging a rickety, rusted aluminum ladder out of his garage. He leaned it against the clogged gutters and slowly, painfully climbed up, using a long pool skimmer to knock the bags down into his overgrown bushes. It took him nearly an hour. He looked exhausted, covered in sweat and grime. I simply smiled, tipped my hat to him in my mind, and threw another bag up there the very next morning. This became my sacred ritual. Rain or shine, snow or sleet, Barnaby provided the ammunition and I provided the artillery. I perfected my throwing technique, learning how to aim for the valley of the roof so the bags would wedge themselves tightly beneath the flashing, making them nearly impossible to dislodge with a simple pole. I aimed for the roof directly above his bedroom window, hoping the summer heat would bake the plastic until the scent permeated the attic insulation. After a month, the man stopped dragging the ladder out. I had successfully broken his will to maintain his own property. The roof became a textured landscape of green and black plastic bags, slowly piling up, rolling into the gutters, blocking the drainage, and creating a festering swamp of rotting leaves and canine waste. But physical vandalism wasn't enough. I wanted social ruin. I went to a local print shop and paid for a stack of premium, glossy flyers. At the top, in bold block letters, it read, "Meet your neighbor." Below that, I printed a high-resolution, full-color photograph of Clementine exactly as I had found her. The matted fur, the sealed eye, the twisted nails. Beneath the photo, I listed his exact address and a brief clinical description of what the shelter veterinarians had found, including the confiscation of his second dog. Under the cover of darkness, wearing a dark hoodie and moving with the quiet efficiency of a ghost, I walked a 4-block radius around his house. I slipped a folded flyer into every single mailbox, tucked them under windshield wipers, and pinned them to the community bulletin board at the local park. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The neighborhood, already primed by the screaming match on the night of the rescue, turned into a hostile, frozen wasteland for him. People crossed the street when he stepped outside. Cashiers at the local corner store glared at him. The ambient pressure of living entirely surrounded by people who know exactly what kind of monster you are began to visibly weigh on him. His shoulders slumped further. His ragged appearance grew even more unkempt. He was a ghost haunting his own ruined castle, living beneath a canopy of rotting dog waste. This relentless campaign of spite lasted for over a year. I threw hundreds of bags onto that roof. It became a masterclass in sustained hatred. Eventually, Corrine and I bought a new house across town, moving away from the neighborhood and the daily walking route. The man probably thought his nightmare was over. He probably thought the phantom bombardier had finally shown him mercy. He was wrong. I live 20 minutes away now, but I am a man of deep and abiding commitments. Every couple of months, usually on a lazy Sunday afternoon, I load Barnaby into the back of my truck. We drive across town, back to the old neighborhood. I park a block away, wait for Barnaby to do his duty, bag it up tightly, and walk down the familiar sidewalk. I wind up, launch the payload onto the ever-sagging shingles of his roof, and walk away. It's a small, quiet gesture. A gentle reminder to a man living in a house surrounded by garbage that the universe has a long memory and that somewhere out there, Clementine is still being avenged. There is a profound lesson hidden in the architecture of consequence. We often wait for karma to balance the scales, hoping some invisible, cosmic force will right the wrongs of the world. But karma is slow, and sometimes it needs a delivery mechanism. Cruelty thrives in silence and shadows, relying on the polite apathy of good people to survive. When you witness the vulnerable being ground into the dirt, you do not have to look away. You can choose to be the consequence. You can choose to be the relentless, inescapable echo of their own cruelty. If you believe in standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share your own stories of righteous retribution in the comments below. Stay vigilant.